If you can follow this one principle, you'll likely reduce your emotional reactivity significantly. This principle isn't about sheer willpower. It's not about exerting massive amounts of energy or effort. It's about being profoundly honest with yourself. Emotions are the match that ignites our reactions. Our habits, self-care practices, and problem-solving abilities are the wood that sustains the fire. However, our thoughts are like gasoline. There's a particular type of thinking that is especially volatile when it comes to emotional reactivity, and that's black and white thinking. And black and white thinking occurs when you take a situation and view it in extreme terms, and you eliminate all the nuances, turning it into something intensely dramatic. This kind of thinking is often recognized by words like always, never, perfect, terrible, worst, best, everything, everyone, nothing, and nobody. The Arbinger Institute refers to these as horribilizations. You take something and make it horrible. Notice how in these moments black and white thinking amplifies the situation. Yes, consider a husband who says to his wife, "You never do the dishes, I always have to clean up after you." Or a young adult struggling with depression might think, "Everything is awful, the world is a terrible place, climate change is hopeless, and I'll never be able to succeed, I'm no good at math." At work, someone might think, "My boss is the worst communicator." Or a young mother might say, "I'm just a terrible person. She has it all together. She's such a saint." Shimon, in each instance, the individual takes a challenging situation and makes it unbearable. They use extreme words like never, always, everything, hopeless, terrible. The more extreme your thinking, the more intense your emotions will be, leading to greater likelihood of depression or anxiety. Black and white thinking also leaves you feeling helpless to overcome that depression or anxiety. It's a distortion of reality. When you engage in black and white thinking, you typically ignore the positive aspects and exaggerate the negative ones. You're not being truthful. So why do we do it if it's so harmful? Subconsciously, you might find black and white thinking appealing because it serves a short-term function. Like a drug, it provides a temporary escape but causes long-term suffering. To move beyond this destructive pattern, recognize the shades of gray in every situation. Understand that life is not about absolutes, but about balance and perspective. Embrace the complexity of your experiences and let go of the extremes. By doing so, you free yourself from the chains of exaggerated emotions and step into a space of peace and clarity. Remember, you have the power to choose your thoughts, and by choosing wisely, you transform your emotional landscape. What function does it serve? First and foremost, it justifies you. Imagine your wife does the dishes sometimes, but not as often as you'd like. Why would you want to frame it in the most negative light by saying, "My wife never does the dishes"? The reason you do this is to make yourself feel like the good guy and to put her down. And by making the situation worse, in the long run, you create a false sense of righteousness for yourself. Consider your boss, who has some skills, strengths, and talents, but struggles to communicate in certain areas. Why would you want to label them as terrible in every way? Because then you don't have to put in the effort to be assertive, communicate your needs, and listen to theirs. Believing your boss is terrible is a mental habit that excuses you from doing the work necessary to improve the situation. Now let's talk about something as universal as struggling with math. If math is challenging for you, why would you want to believe it's impossible for you? Why make a difficult situation even harder? Because then you're excused from trying, from putting in the effort, from the long hours of studying, or from facing the painful emotions of failing a test. Black and white thinking is an old habit that protects you from painful emotions like uncertainty and disappointment. When we exaggerate how bad things are, it excuses us from taking action. It fosters a sense of helplessness, allowing us to avoid responsibility and the feelings of guilt or accountability. Be honest with yourself. It can feel gratifying to call up a friend and tell them you've had the worst day in the whole entire world, only to hear them say, "Oh, you poor thing." But most of the time, we don't even make that call. Instead, we have that internal dialogue with ourselves. "You poor thing," we say, and we kind of like it that way. Vindication feels good. Now, let's consider why your brain creates this backdoor excuse. It's linked to fear and the fight or flight response. Imagine our ancestors at war with another tribe. The fight or flight response shuts down nuance and options in the brain. We see the attacking tribe as subhuman, as terrible, awful beings. This black and white thinking simplifies the act of fighting back, even killing, because we don't see them as humans with families, dreams, and feelings. They are simply the bad guys in life-threatening situations. Understand this, black and white thinking is a survival mechanism that has outlived its usefulness in our everyday lives. By recognizing and releasing this habit, you open yourself to the richness of life's experiences, filled with nuances and possibilities. Embrace the complexity, and you will find that your emotional landscape transforms from one of reactivity to one of resilience and strength. Black and white thinking can sometimes help us make quick and decisive decisions. And simplicity is easier than dealing with the nuanced complexity of reality, and it might even help us survive. However, since the vast majority of our day-to-day decisions aren't life-threatening, black and white thinking interferes with our emotional stability most of the time. So if we want to be less emotionally reactive, we need to replace black and white thinking with something more helpful and more honest. What do we do about it? The first step is embracing the principle of honesty. That you must be willing to admit that black and white thinking is a lie and that you're lying to yourself to excuse yourself from something. If you're willing to be more honest about that, then you can move on to the next step. Notice when you're doing it, recognize your trigger words. Words like always or never are rarely accurate. Do you have other words that you use when justifying yourself? Start to catch yourself doing it. Write a big post-it note somewhere visible, listing the words that are warning signs you're slipping into black and white thinking and emotional reactivity. Then, take a deep breath and slow yourself down. Next, name the emotion. The emotion might be real, but the thoughts aren't. So, say something like, I feel, followed by an emotion word, I feel angry. You are not allowed to say, I feel like you're making me angry, I feel like you always attack me, or I feel like you never take out the trash. These are lies, and they're also thoughts, not feelings. They're exaggerated and dishonest. Stick to 3 words only, I feel, followed by an emotion word. I feel angry, that's honest. Okay, next, reframe the situation. Speak in the gray, and there might be a real problem that needs to be solved. The emotion can motivate you to take action, but extreme thinking like black and white thinking will most likely interfere with your ability to solve the problem. So we're going to look for the gray. Here's how. Use both and instead of extreme thinking. Now, this is an annoying but super effective skill. You can feel 2 emotions at the same time. You can hold 2 nuanced truths that seem contradictory at the same time. For example, when your boss miscommunicates a deadline to you, instead of thinking he's a terrible communicator, you could say, my boss didn't communicate well, and he's also trying really hard to help our team succeed. Or if you mess up, instead of thinking you're either a complete idiot or a perfect worker, you could say, I'm basically intelligent and valuable. At times I make mistakes too. Both of these can be true. Or if a loved one passes away, you could say something like, I feel so sad about the death of my mother, and I feel relieved that I don't have to be her caretaker anymore. Or it could be true that your wife might be insensitive to you sometimes, and she also loves you a lot. This is the skill of both and. You look for the multiple facets of any situation. By embracing the complexity of life and letting go of black and white thinking, you open yourself to a richer, more balanced experience. You find strength in honesty and resilience in recognizing the many shades of gray that make up our reality. Next, look for exceptions. Seek out counterexamples. If you find yourself thinking, oh, my wife never does the dishes, take a moment to recall a time when she did, or recognize other ways she contributes. Challenge that extreme way of thinking by finding exceptions, or be specific. Instead of saying, my boss is a terrible communicator, say, my boss wasn't clear about her expectations for the timeline for this assignment. Shannon, be precise. Instead of saying everything is awful, describe what specifically is awful. Say, she didn't tell me the time frame. And when we get specific, we can actually address the problem. For example, you could say, hey boss, next time I need more clarity about deadlines. Next, check for your own accountability. In most situations, we play a role in the cycle. If there's a communication problem at work, perhaps we need to work on using clarifying statements or being more assertive. And if there's a problem with chores in the marriage, consider how we're contributing, clarifying household tasks, or managing our stress levels better. And we need to see how we can contribute to the solution. Remember, one of the main reasons people get depressed or anxious is how they perceive reality. When we're able to be more flexible, intentional, and truthful in our perceptions and our words, we often find that extreme emotions like depression and anxiety can lift. When you've been thinking in extremes for much of your life, it can be really hard to catch yourself doing it. Chad, working with a therapist can help you notice and replace this type of thinking with something more emotionally stable. Understand that you can change your brain, you can improve your mood, you can get better at feeling. By embracing this journey of self-awareness and transformation, you open yourself to a life of greater emotional balance and inner peace. You begin to see the world with clearer eyes and a more compassionate heart, realizing that the power to change lies within you. When you believe and expect that you are capable of handling anything, and a mental capacity, when you know that in your heart and in your soul, then you no longer begin. You no longer continue to think like a victim. Your emotional capacities, this is something that people victimize themselves with over and over and over again every single day. Again, notice the emphasis. People victimize themselves, and other people will only victimize you if you allow them to. And I'll speak more about that later. But your emotional capacities, I believe that you choose your own feelings, yet your feelings come from your thoughts. And if you can learn how to control your thoughts and understand that your thinking is what creates emotions in you, then you can choose the emotions you have. You don't have to be upset. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be anxious. You don't have to be fearful in given situations. It may be the way that you normally would react, and maybe you'll continue to react that way, but it's still a choice, and your emotional reactions are choices, and when you know that, then you'll be able to catch yourself when you find yourself immobilized or out of control or being pushed around or victimized by your own emotional reactions. Who are the victimizers? Who are the people out there that are manipulating and controlling us? Well, I have a few categories here. The number one on this category is the family. And as much as my family is important to me, I don't think there's anything more important in my life. I don't have to say I don't think. I know there's nothing more important in my life than my wife and my children. And they're all very, very important to me, and I have 7 of them. Each one of them is precious and dear and has their own purpose and is on their own path. I try to keep that family life something that isn't going to later be the source of their being victimized emotionally. And if you look at virtually everybody in mental institutions across the country and take a survey or a poll on what it is that they couldn't deal with and why they ended up mentally unbalanced or incapacitated in some way, you'll find that about 99% of it is from families. Families, people telling each other how they have to be, what they have to think, how they have to dress, what their value ought to be, what their religious and spiritual orientation ought to be, and what kinds of cars they ought to drive, and then what kinds of food they ought to eat, and who they ought to talk to, who they have to hate, and who they have to stay away from. They have to be victimized by, if you will, families. And you have to be very, very careful as a member of a family and understand that while it is the most important institution in our culture, it is also the one that does the most damage. And you have to know that in order to be your own person and not be having your strings pulled by somebody else, yet you're going to have to stand up to family members, whether they're immediate family or extended family. The ability and the willingness to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to be what you think I ought to be. I have to stand up for it and be the kind of person I am. That's what pulling strings is about. Not allowing anyone, family or otherwise, to be your victimizer. The other big victimizer is the job. A lot of people don't like their job. A lot of people feel that they're not pursuing their bliss. They're not following their own purpose and why they're here. They find themselves being pushed around and even going to work every single day and going home and being full of remorse. And then every remorse continues to grow and so on. If you feel victimized by your job, then you have to take some time to ask yourself why you're allowing yourself to stay and do things that don't make sense to you or don't fit in with what your own view of why you're here is all about. Another big victimizer is professionals and authority figures. People are intimidated. So many people are intimidated by that whole teacher complex or that whole doctor complex. They go into a dentist's office. The other one is paying the bill. They're the ones making this whole thing happen in that beautiful office. You see, it's because it's costing you a fortune to have a crown put on your tooth. You're calling him doctor. He's calling you by your first name. It seems to me it ought to be the other way around. Being intimidated by authority figures, whether it's medical people, is common. Sure, it's nice to show respect to other people. I'm not saying you ought to be disrespectful, but I'm saying you ought not to ever place anybody else's head above your own. People do this with authority figures all the time. Police, military, and people who have money are all in this category. These kinds of people in positions of authority can be a big category of victimizers. And bureaucracies are an enormous victimizer in our culture, particularly in Western culture. You know, we have to keep records for everything that we do, and just make an appointment with the Social Security Administration sometime, or go to have your driver's license renewed, or go down to the post office, or go to an IRS office and sit down to try to get some information. You find yourself being shifted around and around here and there and everywhere. This kind of bureaucracy is something that a lot of people feel victimized by. I think it's unnecessary, and I don't think we have to experience it and feel it that way. There are ways to deal with those institutions and keep yourself sane. I'll be talking about some of those. Finally, the biggest victimizer of all, of course, is yourself. Yep, yourself. Despite all the people in the other categories, the fact is that you are the one who victimizes yourself. You are the one who makes these things more important than yourself. You are very often the victim of your own training, your own history, your own values, and your own behavior towards your body and your mind. Your own self-portraits that you have inculcated over a lifetime. When you look at all the victimizers out there, and you look at all the people who are pushing you around, perhaps you feel they are responsible for a lot of your obsequious behavior. Always keep in mind that you are the product of the choices that you make as you go through your life. And instead of saying, why is this happening to me? And isn't this awful? And why, God, are you putting me through this? Begin to ask yourself the question, what's in it? What's in it for me? What's the lesson? What do I have to gain here? How can I transcend this and get past it? When you do that, you'll begin to move on to the next level, which I call operating from strength. And moving forward towards pulling your own strings in all areas of your life. You want to develop an attitude, a self-portrait, in which you begin to visualize and image yourself as a tower of strength, not weakness. Keep in mind that people respect strength, not weakness. But I can remember teaching for many years at the university level, the high school level, and even at the elementary level for a while, but particularly at the university level and the graduate school. I would give an evaluation at the end of the course each year and each semester. I would get a whole lot of feedback. Most of the people who would fill out these forms would write something nice. He was terrific. You were great. It was a great course. Best class I ever had. I would just sort of flip through those, very neatly until I'd get to the ones that were critical, the ones that I felt were helpful and honest, not nasty or abusive in any way, but people who weren't afraid to say what they really felt. Those are the ones I paid the most attention to. It's interesting when you are looking for an honest opinion. When you really want help, you're going to go to a person who is not afraid to tell you the truth. You know who the people are that you can go to when you want to be stroked or when you want to be made to feel better. When you need help and you need an honest, straightforward, truthful answer, you'll respect strength, not weakness. Weakness is saying the thing that makes somebody else feel good. And strength is operating from integrity, authenticity, and honesty. People respect that. I know in my own life, when I really want to know what I could do to improve something, I know that my wife isn't afraid to tell me. There are a lot of people who are, but people who work for me don't want to tell me that. They are going to tell me things that will make me feel good and make them look good. But I know that my wife, Marcy, will not be afraid to tell me what I have to do or what's missing.